Today we're going to talk about double action semi-autos for police and security work. And when I say double action semi-autos, I don't mean through ATF classification where most striker fire pistols end up being classified as DAOs. I'm talking about double action semi-automatic handguns that have an actual hammer on the outside or a hammer stub that gets pulled back with the first pull of the trigger. Whether that be DAO, traditional DASA, or the new DAs that have a partially cocked hammer that come back a little bit when you rack the slide, but the trigger pull gives it the rest of its motion, so that way you get a better first trigger pull, or a more consistent, all the time double action. We're also going to give you some considerations about both on and off duty carry that you might not have thought about before. Stick around. Alright man, take a seat, buckle up. We'd start with orientation of the car here, but we got calls pending and we got to get to them. So, we're rolling. We're going to have to learn on the way. Alright, today Now the way a double action only pistol works is very simple. It's kind of like having a double action only revolver, except that it's fed with a magazine through the grip into the slide instead of being fed through a cylinder. Every time you pull the trigger on a double action only pistol, the hammer comes back and falls forward and the gun fires. Every time you have that long 10 to 12 pound trigger pull, depending on what brand of pistol you have. Now there's also a short reset. There's a bunch of different names for them, but I like to call them a short reset or pre-cocked double action only, and that is where you load the gun the first time and you chamber around, the hammer gets pre-cocked a little back. This isn't one of those pistols, but the hammer gets pre-cocked a little bit back, which allows you to have a lighter trigger pull the first time you fire. Now the other type is a DASA, which is where the first shot that you fire is double action, and when the slide cycles, the hammer's cocked back. And then your second shot is going to be a lighter, crisper, single action shot. And then when you're done firing your course of fire, you push down on a lever on this HK-USP. It's a lever and a safety selector for this particular type. On Berettas, it'll often be on the slide. It'll be a decocker and safety lever, or just a decocker. And then on Sig Sauers, there'll be a lever on the side of the grip. But they're all pretty much in the same area where you're going to be able to get to it if you're right-handed with your thumb. And with a lot of them, they're ambidextrous controls on the other sides, Berettas in particular. The great advantage of these is that this type of design has been around since a little before World War II. That DASA, or double action only design for a semi-automatic pistol, has been around a really, really long time. And so the guns that are coming out by major manufacturers now are pretty much bulletproof. Now, striker fires have come up a long way in their technology, and they've become very, very reliable. Many people would argue just as reliable as these, but it's very rare that you find a DASA gun on the market today that's not a good gun. You'd be hard pressed to find one that isn't going to function right out of the box, and a lot of that is because the companies that are building them have had a long time to work on the geometry. And in fact, they've had so long to work on the geometry, the triggers have gotten better over time, unlike a lot of revolver triggers that, because of liability reasons, have actually gotten worse, and people had to go get trigger jobs done on their pistol right when they get them. With most DASAs, and especially your short reset or pre-cocked double action onlys, they have awesome triggers right out of the box. Now, the way I see it, these have fallen out of favor with a lot of police agencies for two major reasons. One is cost. Your average DASA or DAO pistol is going to cost more than your average striker fire guns. In 2016, I can get a Glock 9mm or 40 caliber or 357 SIG or 45 ACP for about half the price of what I can get an HK-USP for, and a little more than half the price of what I can get a Sig Sauer for or a Beretta 92, although the Beretta prices have been coming down recently as well. The other reason is that it is objectively easier to teach people on a striker fire platform than it is a DAO, a DASA, or even the short reset pre-cocked DAO pistols. These require some ability to manipulate the trigger, and so a lot of firearms instructors have pushed away from DAO and DASA pistols and pushed people toward striker fires, because if you can imagine, from an instructor's point of view, especially if they're charging for the service or if they have a limited amount of time with the students in order to get them proficient, make them happy, or make an agency happy, a striker fire is a lot easier to teach. And it is. For most people, having a consistent 5-pound trigger pull on a striker fire pistol, like an XD, especially the XDM has an awesome trigger, or a Smith & Wesson M&P, or a Glock, is a lot easier to teach because it's a lot easier to teach people to manage those triggers. The plus side of a DASA pistol, especially in that regard, is that even though it takes longer to learn, it is totally learnable. Even the DAOs are totally learnable. People learn how to shoot revolvers, both DA and SA, and people learn how to shoot revolvers DAO all the time back in the day, and nobody had a problem with it. We just had to spend more time on teaching people trigger control. The huge advantage of a DASA system is that after you fired that first double action shot, and the slide has cycled, you now have a nice crisp single action that you can really wing rounds very easily. Even a fairly unskilled shooter with the triggers, the single action triggers that come on most DASA pistols, can really make this pistol sing. And a very, very practiced user can make these sing at extremely long distance, unlike with striker fire pistols, where most people that are firing striker fire pistols at really long distances aren't doing them stock. They're putting new springs or new connectors on them to make the trigger more like a single action that you would get in a pistol like this. Now, it does take quite a bit more training to get used to transitioning between a long double action trigger that's a lot stiffer and the single action trigger that you get with a DASA pistol. And it's very hard because of grip angle and because of the geometry inside for companies to make a traditional double action only that is as easy to learn as a striker fire pistol. Although the short reset or pre-cock triggers have come a long way in that regard in recent years. So I've seen a lot of firearms instructors and a lot of agencies push new guys away from double action only or DASA pistols, and I don't think that that is always with the best interest of the student. Sometimes I think it's in the best interest of the instructor, it's in the best interest of time, and it's in the best interest of cost when you're talking about an agency that's selecting a new duty pistol. We have to remember when we do things like that, there's always a trade-off. The newest technology that's out there is not always the best technology. Sometimes it's just the most cost-effective technology, and sometimes it's the technology that makes life easier for people other than the end user. And one thing you hear people talk about a lot when it comes to handguns, and especially with duty pistols, is safety and the ability of a pistol to be holstered, unholstered, and handled as safely as possible so that it will only go off when we want it to go off. Well, one thing that isn't often taken into account is reholstering the pistol, and the fact that a DAO or double action, single action semi-automatic pistol has an external hammer, has the ability when you draw the pistol out, you draw it out like you would any other, and when you put it back, if you put your thumb on the hammer and slide it back in, if something gets stuck in the trigger guard, you'll be able to feel it before the gun goes off. Or, depending on the type of pistol and how it is sprung, your thumb will just keep the trigger from being pulled and keep the gun from going off completely. Now, this was originally an issue with police officers. We'd go to the range and we'd have our holsters up on the right side of our hip, and then we'd have jackets on with little toggles, and the little toggles, occasionally we'd have somebody with a striker fire pistol would get the little toggle caught in the trigger guard as they were reholstering, and the gun would go off. So that's no good. So what companies did, very smartly might I add, is they put the little toggles now at the front of all the jackets. If you have any jackets by True Spec or 511 or Blau or anybody like that, they put a little toggles at the front. So what do we all do directly after all the companies change their designs so the toggles are at the front? Well, then it becomes popular for everybody to do appendix carry. Now, as you add a little bit of safety with a DASA pistol having a hammer on the back and being able to holster an appendix with a little bit more safety, is that a deal breaker for striker fires? Or is it a deal maker with DASA or DAOs? Not really, but it's something to take into consideration if you intend on carrying the same gun on duty that you do off duty. So why would you want to go with a double action only or a DASA pistol instead of a striker fire or a single action pistol? Well, one is that the hammer being down isn't as scary to some people as a single action pistol. If you don't have the gift of gab to explain to people about single action pistols and why they're not any less safe than double action pistols, then maybe this is a better option for you because it's not a conversation that you want to get into with people and having to defend your position on it. Another reason you may want to go with a double action pistol, especially a double action only pistol, is if you're transitioning from a revolver. Let's say you originally had a revolver and you're going to switch to a semi-automatic pistol. It's an easy transition to go from a revolver to a double action only pistol because the manual of arms is very similar. You only have to learn the basic functions of the semi-automatic pistol, and you don't have to worry about a bunch of other levers and buttons. You have a magazine release, which operates in very much the same cognitive way that a cylinder release would have worked on your old revolver, and you have a slide to remember to manipulate, but beyond that, there's not a lot else to remember. And then, of course, there's policy concerns. Some places require that you use a DAO or DASA pistol, and so if that's the issue, then your only question is whether you want to use a DAO or a pure DASA. Well, while DAO has a consistent trigger pull, and with the new shorter reset ones you can get a lighter consistent trigger pull, it is generally going to have a longer trigger travel, so it limits the speed at which you can fire the gun for most users, even if just by a little bit. If you're worried about making long-range shots, let's say you're going to transition from a revolver to a semi-automatic pistol, and you know that there's a probability you could have to make longer range shots with the pistol. Let's say you're in a very rural environment, a DASA pistol can sometimes make more sense, because if you anticipate a longer distance shot, you can thumb the hammer back manually and have that nice crisp shot for long distance right out the gate. So these are just a couple of things to think about when you're choosing a new duty pistol. I also have a video on revolvers as duty weapons in case you work in the security industry and you're interested in knowing whether that's a viable duty weapon and what the advantages and disadvantages of those are. And I also have in the works a cocked and locked or single action only as a duty pistol video and a striker fire pistol as a duty weapon video, so that you can see all of the different pluses and minuses of the different types of guns involved. If this content has helped you in some way, consider joining the shift over at the Patreon page. For $1 a month, you get to see these videos when they're rendered and not when they come out, normally at least a week in advance. I like to be further ahead than that, but it's normally at least a week to 3 weeks in advance. And you also get to see a little bit of the behind the scenes, and you help out the channel and you help me get better so that I can make better videos about more topics with better props for all of you. You guys be safe, and we'll see you next week. I'd like to thank all the Patreon supporters, and especially the shift supervisor level Patreon supporters that we have listed here. Your contributions are what allows free field training to continue on and become better. Thank you. Well, now, if you like that video, go ahead and subscribe, because there's a whole lot more to come. As soon as I finish up these calls, go 10-8. County 291. 291.